Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood production. This is going to be a bit of a less so of an open discussion and more so of here's how you draft the Shadow Heroes. Because
Right.
honestly, I think the Shadow Heroes have this image of being very high ceiling, very low floor, which tends to be the case. But
That is
hopefully,
true.
these tips and tricks about how to draft and play these heroes really will help you in your. I think they're in the pre-release,
Yeah,
skirmish,
definitely
and the Nat
Nationals.
season. Yeah, and the Nat
So
season coming up here.
3 seasons of Monarch. Yeah, I guess we should specify Monarch, but I guess we
Yeah,
already
Monarch
knew
draft.
that because Shadow. Yeah, until Dust Till Dawn
Exactly.
comes out, then we'll have. Actually, that's not even a draftable set.
No, we
So
can't draft that
Monarch's
one,
the
but
only draftable set with Shadow Heroes in them. Yeah, yeah.
sure. So I'm gonna start with Chane and then
And I'll take it
fork it over
over
to Rob
for
for Levia,
Levia.
our resident Levia player
I
who
guess
used
I
to.
have
We
the most
actually
reps on
we
Levia. Yeah, I
not in
guess.
draft. I think I have more draft
Not in
reps than you
draft.
on
You
Levia, but in
definitely played a
CC.
lot of draft.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
now we've
yeah.
we've looked over it now. So I'm going to start with Chane here. So Chane works off the Blood Debt mechanic. Same idea as Levia, but Chane works more directly off your Blood
Did
Debt.
you say
So
Levia?
Levia, 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 Lev, whatever you want to
I'm
call
gonna
her.
try to consistently
Uh,
say Levia. Yeah.
sure, we'll call her Levia. So Chane works it more directly, where you're able to play cards out of your Blood Debt if they indicate they could do so. At the cost of being dealt damage the longer those cards stay in your banished zone. So in general, early turns tend to be on the weaker side, as Chain generates additional Soul Shackle every turn. You don't have to, it is optional, but generally you're going to want to get that go again to kind of stay on rate-ish, because your general value card for card is a bit weaker with Chain cards here. So you're able to also block with cards if necessary, and then keep pitch cards to play out your banish. So things like being able to block and get anywhere from 7 to 9 value off 3 cards, keep blue, and still be able to come in with your shackle for like 5 to 10 damage, depending on what you're able to keep, right? So Chain tends to not have so many typical like bomb cards that you can easily tell the hero is worth forcing or is open. Unlike cards like for Bolton, like if you see Lumina Ascension,
Yeah.
pack one, pick one, you see a V of the Vanguard pass to you, like pick 3 or
Classic.
pick 4. Oh my good god.
You just
You
you
can
mash
you
that
can
crap.
yeah, you're just like
Yeah.
you just give up whatever the first 3 cards are. Hopefully you have some generic stuff you can use. You just pick it up, right? So there are some uniquely strong cards nonetheless that do work in tandem. Chain does focus mainly on a couple different strategies, but pushing a critical mass of Arcane is one of the better strategies, which is like pseudo unblockable for most decks on a regular turn, coupled with very wide turns with the help of Blood Debt Pool to force the game. Some cards like Rift Through Reality kind of work in tandem, where you're going to be doing your arcane damage. Chances are they probably don't have that much spell void, if they even do have any spell void. You get that free arcane, and then you're able to go even wider off the cards that directly relate to arcane damage being dealt. So Rip Through Reality, Piercing Shadow Veil, I think is the other one that gains +2,
Mm,
cards like that.
yeah.
So early picks in general should early picks in general should usually be generic poppers if you open them. There are packs that just like say no, right?
Yeah.
It's not 100% you'll get the red version, right?
Yeah.
No matter what hero you are, because generally these are going to be cards that never wheel, because everyone wants these, and they're good cards in their own rights, while also being able to pop a Herald from Prism to pretty much shift the tempo almost completely, especially on those big red Heralds. Herald of Protection being the really good one. A lot of the
Mm-hmm. A lot of the
Tenacity just finishes
sixes
game.
become fives, and you can't pop it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So these cards I'm talking about, it's no different from Chain. He's going to want cards like Pound for Pound, Rally the Rearguard, Stony Moonhog, and Red. They are 6 power and above. And to a lesser extent, the 6+ powers, you can also look for Lunartide Plunderer. The red one's specifically good because it comes in for 7, and this is the break point, and this is going to be the same for Levia too. So it's a very good card for both of
Yeah.
these heroes. And it comes in for 7, and it's very relevant on hit to light heroes, because Bolton needs it to go wide, and Prism needs it for a win con into Levia, because into that deck, as Rob's gonna say, you can't just slam heralds. Levia
Yeah.
is gonna pop most, if not all of them. So you need your backup plan, which is just create a shield and just smack them with Iris, right? So Lunartide coming in with a very relevant on hit here. The 3 cost is a bit expensive, but Chain generally needs to run a bunch of blues anyways, just to be able to power his very big turns, especially on his last turn when he's going super wide, and paying for things like time skippers, ebb and fold, stuff like that. Consuming Aftermath Red, it is a rare, but it's a very, very good card if you can pick it up for Chane because it's a game ender, right? And Chane
Mm-hmm.
sometimes is able to do a bunch of true damage with Arcane, but has a bit of trouble actually ending the game where
That's
you're
true.
able to do
Yeah.
Arcane and some physical, right? So it has Dominate, can allow you to banish a Shadow card to use on the same turn or for a ladder turn, and it's still a popper because it's still a 6 power in a pinch, right? So I'd recommend this card as an early pick if there are weaker generics in the pack, as you can also use it for Levia, so you're still staying open, because Levia loves this card in red also for this
Yeah.
very, very similar reasons. So powerful early cards you should be picking up if you're hedging Shadow and or Chane. Red Hal from Beyond. Yellow is fine, but definitely not nearly as high of a pick as the red. Soul Reaping. This one's very, very chain specific and the closest thing to a bomb as you can really get. Aether Ironweave, extremely good because it gives you 1 point of armor, so it stops the 7 breakpoints. So like, and anytime you need to be
Mm-hmm.
blocking 7, it gives you that armor to block.
Yep.
And it gives you that 2 pitch on like your very last turn where you can play a non-attack attack and just get the 2 pitch, which can usually equate for at least 3 to 4 damage on that turn, either from like Howl from Beyond cost 2, your Rip Through Realities cost 2, anything like that, really, right? So, and Seas of Agony is kind of a given for Chane. If you're seeing a lot of these pass by it's a little bit tricky with Seas of Agony because the minute you start, if you don't pick up the first one and you send
Yeah.
2+ to your left, they might go into Chane, and
It's
then you're kind
true.
of
You don't want to get
turning
that
yourself a little
signal.
the other way.
Right.
It's tricky with Seeds of Agony. I think your hope is that they're coming late enough that you already see some stuff where you're either already still open anyways, and you see it and you see a Seeds come like pick 4, pick 5, and you just grab it and you'd be like, okay, well, I'll pick this up for Chane at the very least, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of the better cards that you could pick earlier. The other ones that you can pick for Chane, really, other than the Red Howl from Beyond, because it combos really well with the damage dealer, is Bounding Demagon and Riftbind. So these are kind of your uh, bread and butter turns that are going specifically wide, and they pump and work in tandem with each other. So you're allowing it to effectively be a +4 off anything, right? So if you play like Red Howl into Bounds, Bounds is going to get the +1 from itself because you've played your non-attack and then you've played it from Banish.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite effective. And then Reaping's just really good because you can use it for everything. Like if you don't have pitch, you can banish Blood Debt. Those Blood Debt cards can be used either on the same turn or later. And it is still a pauper. It does block 3 and it does come in for 6. So it's still pretty reasonable regardless.
Yeah.
And the next stage after the kind of seeds, how this is less, you're less and less open and you're going more towards Shadow in general and Chane. Uh, it depends on what you're seeing in your packs, right? But in general, you're still looking for powerful generics as the higher priority because they're less likely to wheel. So you always got to be thinking about the wheel in Monarch because you get 1 extra card. So this is a 15 card pack versus a 14 card pack,
Mm.
which is something that people might not be used to from playing a lot of Outsiders and Uprising, which were the last 2 draft sets. So there's an extra card, so you should be able to count the wheel a little bit more than you could earlier because you're getting 1 extra card in each piece, right? So for Chane, you're looking at Belittle Minnowism. Red is obviously the best one. Red Belittle, Red Minnowism. You're gonna want a Blue Minnowism at the very least, just to combo with your Belittle. So that's important. The Yellow Minnowism is also still fine because it's still a non-attack and still has that extra tandem with Bounding and Rift, where it gives another +1 essentially. Captain's Call is a stupendous card in any color. It is a rare, but I recommend when you see it, super, super, super good card, right? Gives go again, gives the buff. It's so good utility. It really reminds me a lot of E-Strike, like the +2 or go again. It's
Mm.
very, very similar in that kind of utility, but it's just a rare. It does come in every color, so I would pick this up probably if you're in Chain. It's just like a must-have kind of thing if you see it through. And is still a non-attack that actually lets you play Bounding from your Banish Zone and buffs your Riftbind. Seeping Shadows is the Shadow kind of equivalent of it-ish. It just costs a lot more. Specifically, you want the blue and the yellow. The red's not great. I mean, letting you get the cost 2s. So that's something to consider with Seeping Shadows, but it's still a very good card in blue and yellow specifically, and it gives you the ability to get large combo turns later in the game by giving you, for Chain, your Bounding and Riftbind, it gives them go again, and the +1 turns into a +2 off both of those cards, essentially. Red Bounding and Red Riftbind, and to a lower extent, the Yellow Riftbind, should be considered once you are sure about Chain, right? So possibly midway pack 1, a bit later, when you're like locked into Chane, you should be picking these cards up pretty aggressively because they are your bread and butter and they are going to be what makes up the bulk of your turns. So maybe you have like a couple generics, a pauper, a seeds, and then you're seeing Shadow and Runeblade is a lot more open. Like you're seeing more of those cards. That's the point where you want to shift more into maybe less so into Levia. And now you're definitely going into Chane, seeing these cards specifically. Another card I'll put up here, and there might be people who disagree, is Rip Through Reality, specifically like the reds and the yellows. And when I mean disagree, maybe putting it up as high as the Bounding. I mean, you
Right.
can't really ignore the fact it's a very, very good card, especially the red. Having innate go again to go super wide is quite good. The reason why I think the yellow is also quite good is because you can combo with stubbies, right? And it is like a 3 power or less card, so you can still reveal it for something like a Belittle. So it still is able to get up to that 4 breakpoint with cards like Stubbies, which is quite good. It also can combo off your Minnowism, right? 3 or less base attack. So it's still quite flexible, and I still do like the yellow. Um, and it's still like doing Arcane to give go again is still pretty common. The middle picks here, so this kind of like again one more pick down, so you're kind of rounding out the deck. You're trying to get more of the bulk of the deck here. Is core cards that don't necessarily act as win cons by themselves, but support the overall strategy, right? So these are generic such as Surging Militia Red, because this usually leaks 1 damage as a 2 card block, assuming they're both 3 blocks. It will gain +1 and +1 again, and come in for 7 essentially on their 6 block. So it's essentially an arcane ping when you really look at it that way, right? Red Warmonger's Recitals, quite good also, because it allows you to recycle cards like Riftbind and Bounding on the on hit, because these cards don't have on hits by themselves, they're just pure damage. So when you add if you add a Warmongers to it, it adds that kind of really annoying breakpoint, right? And then they come in for 3 and then 4, right? So if you pitch a blue, play the Warmongers, play the Bounding, and then you can Galaxy after it. The Bounding comes in for 7. They don't really want to give you like their piece of armor because it's not really a good 7 on hit to block. Brandish, specifically the red one, allows you to extend your chain, and the on hit can turn your Galaxy black into a breakpoint if you've played a banish card. So that's very important because if you're able to do that and make your Galaxy black from 3 to 4, it does the Arcane 2 on hit, and that's such an annoying breakpoint to deal with because it's a weapon swing, so you don't even have to pay for it really. Like you don't have to give him a card to do so. Ebonfold is the second best chain equipment outside of the chess piece, because you're able to gain a resource from the pitch, in your pitch from the draw, but it's also powerful because you could banish a good Blood Debt card, allowing for a good hand fixer late in the game, especially working well with your pitch stack to draw an extra blue. Stubby Hammers becomes a great pick the more 3 power or lower go again cards you have. So the more Belittle and Brandishes you have and you can draft, the better it is because it helps very much to be wide. So if you get like 3, 4, 5+ damage on this card, it's just open, not this card, off the activation of the equipment. It's just like on the field. It's not, you're not actually using it, right? As far as needing to draw it and play it or taking damage from Blood Debt.
Yeah.
So that really kind of depends. It's a bit difficult to recommend it as a very early pick, given you have no idea how many of those cards are available, and it's not as open as people think. It's really more of a Bolton chain card. And Bolton has Gallantry Gold, so even then it's kind of like if you pick Stubbies up early and then you see Gallantry Gold, I would probably rather have the Gallantry Gold. So I think Stubbies is can be quite good in these decks, but it's very, very dependent on the deck itself. But later, it's a fairly strong pick in like pack 2, pack 3 when the deck's more fleshed out. Card can be very good win con if you can string 3 or more attacks together. As far as Runeblade cards, Arcanic Crackle, Vexing Mouse, those are the 2 big ones, specifically in the blue pitch, are extremely good and should make up as much of your blue curve as humanly possible. Because these cards all block 3, they all do free arcane damage, so attacking with them is good, blocking with them is fine, pitching with them is fine, right? And that's just like the best utility you can get. And you're the only one who can use them because the Runeblade cards, right? Given only Chane can use them, picking these up super early isn't like particularly recommended over some of the higher priority picks I already mentioned before, especially because if people are maybe not committing to Chane early, it is possible to wheel these cards. It's not, I've seen it before, less so Vexing because it is rare. More so I'd probably pick up the Vexing ASAP and then pick up the Arcana Crackle a bit later. The yellows are fine. The red is not bad, especially as far as the Arcana Crackle go, because it's just a 0 cost. So it could be quite good, especially again with stubby hammers. That becomes a 0 for 5 off stubby hammers. That's pretty damn good, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something you should also consider. And the last card I want to put here is Ghostly Visitor Red. Quite good for Chane because it's only a 1 cost, can be played from Banish, kind of everything you want. It's 3 block. It can be strung together for that extra oomph as far as the breakpoint goes, because it still comes in for 4. So we're going into the last picks here. So they're pretty much just supporting role player cards that are not necessarily bad, but they shouldn't really be picked over the aforementioned cards I kind of mentioned in either sections, the early picks or like the middle picks.
Mm-hmm.
So Dimensional Gateway is a decent card because it pings them for 1 arcane and it lets you banish, assuming it's a Shadow Runeblade. But when it misses, it's just kind of awful because you've now pitched a card, you've paid 1, and you've done nothing.
Yeah.
You've possibly done an arcane, you've possibly banished, but with Shackle, you're not going to have a hard time banishing cards. So I don't like it as much. I think it's better in the red and the yellow because that opt becomes very important to make sure it hits. And it still acts as a non-attack action that internally buffs Bounding and Riftbind.
Hmm?
So it's a reasonable card, but it is a rare. I wouldn't really focus too much on the card. It will probably wheel. It will like 99% wheel unless someone is like unrealistically thinking it's going to be a fantastic card. Unhallowed Rites Red is worth the pickup late, as you can recycle one of your seeds to provide extra value late in the game. Red Tremor of oh my god, I'm just gonna say Red Tremor. I can't
Irathiel.
pronounce Irathiel,
Irathiel.
whatever.
Yeah.
Some elvish sounding shit right there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Red Tremor comes in as a 1 for 6 as long as you banished a card. So it's very good ratios. It's like a 1 for 6, right? But it only blocks 2. Can't gain go again off Shackle. It is a generic. People seem to forget it's a generic card because it works so well with Chane, because it's like an auto in Chane. The minute you Shackle 1, it's always going to be on, right? But if you're able to give it go again off like Captain's Call or Seeping Shadow, because Seeping Shadow is everything, Captain's Call is everything. It would have to be the yellow or the red Captain's Call because the blue is just 0 cost though. So again, it's getting a little
Right.
bit hazy there.
Right. Yeah.
The last sleeper pick that I think you'll see a fair amount is Yinty Yanty. Man, do I love Yinty Yanty. You know why I love Yinty Yanty, Rob?
Saying the name Yinty
Uh,
Yanty.
is once you have a Shackle out, it's a 0 for 4. It's
Mm.
just a 0 for 4. And the blue is fantastic because it's a 0 for 3. This
Yeah.
blue card
Mono
doesn't
blue.
kill
That's
you,
great.
and it blocks 3 damage. Like, it's not going to hurt you if you banish it. You could pitch it if you get it. You can block with it. Big fan. And this card's going to wheel. Like, this card will wheel. But, like, when you see it
I'd
on the
probably wheel it. I'd
when you
probably
see it on
pass
the
up on it.
wheel,
Yeah.
you're just like, yeah, it's just like super good specifically in Chane
Mm.
that it's super hard to like, if you have nothing and you see Yinty, you just don't have to force it. And it's probably coming back to you.
Right.
You're just chilling, right? So it's pretty good. In general, I don't really like the blue Blood Dead cards other than the Riftbind. I don't love Riftbind blue. It's kind of it
Right.
could possibly be like a 3 or a 4 on a super big turn,
Like
like
max.
the very end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bounding and Rip is serviceable. I think Bounding, just because it blocks for 3, Rip, it blocks for 3. If you banish it, you can play it, especially when you have stubbies. Gets the buff. You want to stay away from them as much as possible. They just end up clogging up your banish. It's very hard to get them out and other powerful cards because you can really only shackle once a turn. You don't really want to be using your go again cards like Seeping, Captains, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
on cards like this because they don't really cause a break point or an on hit, and you don't really want to waste your damage up front. Otherwise, you just fatigue out. I would recommend the deck overall to be about 13 to 18 Blood Dead cards in a 30 card deck. That's a rough estimate. You don't have to stick by it. I think you don't really want to be pushing 20 plus because the minute you're on 20 plus Blood Debt, it's probably full of a lot of crappy yellow and blue Blood Debt cards. I'm talking like blue, I'm talking like Void Wraith, I'm talking about like
Mm.
really average cards that you end up dealing damage to you because you're gonna like banish 3 or 4 of these off Blood Debt, and you're just gonna be like, how the hell do I get all of these out? And then you're gonna get them out, you're gonna take 1,
Mm.
and then you're gonna be dealing 5 damage, and you're just gonna
Right.
lose.
It's very
So
mediocre. Yeah.
very mediocre. Like, focus on the reds for the most part. The yellows and blues will come. They'll wheel. Like, really. Even 2 chains, they're not. Pick up the blue Yinties. Just pick up the blue Yinty Yanties. Do yourself a favor. They block for 3. They pitch. That's really what you want to do. And as far as playing Chane, the real idea is that, again, earlier on, you kind of want to stack some shackles, and you want to start your pitch stack. That you have to remember that by uh, shackle one, shackle. So you're on a 30 card deck. You're going to be banishing one, two, three, and four, right? So it's 10 cards essentially on the banish. And then in those 5 turns, so you're opening and your 4 turns, you're drawing exactly 4 cards a turn.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming you're drawing the full four, you're drawing 20 cards,
Right. So
right? And that's your 30.
that's your deck.
So if
Yeah.
you that's your deck, and if you can remember that basic kind of math, and then it's like counting cards. Like you plus one and minus one depending on where the
Like
stack goes.
pitcher. Yeah.
You wanna like picture it and just like adjust, and don't be afraid to even really good players. Don't be afraid to sit there and start counting your
Oh,
deck and making sure you know where you are in your
getting
pitch stack.
flashbacks to Monarch and yeah,
Everyone does that.
yeah.
Because you need to know. Like if you're off by one, like you just lose the game. Like it's pretty important.
It's important to know.
So
Yeah.
I would say to play Chane, build your ideal Chane decks and just practice pitch stacking and counting your pitch and making sure like you're able to string together those like combo back to back, and that you're able to get what you need in the blood debt, in the banish, and what you're able to draw. And then if you're able to do that and you win by stringing together about 10 to 12 arcane damage on average, that's kind of the winning number. I mean, you can have 20 plus arcane and just kill them, like you're just Kano at that point. But in general, if you're on 10 to 13 ish arcane damage and just hit them with physical, you should be good enough to squeak by enough physical to win the game here. And it's a bit of a primer off
Awesome.
Chane here.
Yeah.
Move on to the
Very
Shadow Brute
detailed.
herself.
Yeah. Let's
Mm.
talk about
A bit of a
Levia a little
primer.
bit. A little bit of a primer, more like a structured manual, but no, that was good. That was good. Okay, so Levia, so she's a hero that excels at pushing a lot of raw damage as opposed to Chane, who deals a lot of arcane, because her cards are actually pretty well statted compared to the average, balance of cost to damage ratio. But they also come at a downside where every strong brute attack has to banish 3 from grave, so you are kind of stuck at setting up your grave a little bit. So banishing cards from the grave relies on there actually being cards in grave, so Levia would need to work on building that grave in the early game by blocking and mainly swinging with the meat axe, her weapon. This leads to a more passive playstyle later on, because you're kind of just blocking a bunch and swinging the meat axe, but it evolves into a more explosive game plan mid to late game. Levia is uniquely positioned to be able to pick up the cards she wants while also getting 6 power cards to combat Phantasm, right? Which in a way makes her a little easier to draft. And getting a good ratio of 6 attack cards is crucial in Levia, because missing the ability to, banish and turn off Blood Debt in the mid to late game can basically cost you the game. You'll take 5-6 damage, and then at that point it's a quarter of your life, and you pretty much lose the game. I echo Eric's point about picking up generic poppers early in the game, because you want to stay open while also combating Prism's Heralds. I think it's very important to stay open early game, of course. They're great no matter what hero you're on, so every hero is going to want them, so they probably won't be wheeling. And Levia can also banish them to turn off Blood Debt, even if they're generic. So they work kind of in multiple positive ways for Levia. Rally the Rear Guard is especially good, I guess the red one, for 6, because it helps discard additional cards to fuel the grave, right? And because Brute has some non-blocking cards, it can turn that non-blocking card into a 3-block if you discard it. So, a lot of the cards like Smash with Big Tree, Pulping, Deadwood
Rumbler, I
Rumbler
guess.
too, Rumbler as well. So very good for adding block to cards that otherwise don't block. Some of the shadow cards like Consuming Aftermath and Lunartide Plunderer are also very good for Levia. Same reasons for Chane as they are for Chane, but Levia can also use them to turn off Blood Debt, which is great. And speaking of shadow cards, you should always snap pick Shadow Puppetry, because it's probably the
Same.
best shadow card in the entire set, right? So if you see it, just take it. It's amazing
fan.
in both Chane and Levia, and especially Levia, because she doesn't have much go again. So it's actually really nice to be able to play it onto like one of her strong brute cards. And other cards such as Howl from Beyond and Soul Harvest are really, really good. You can banish the Howl from Beyond and play it anyway, and Soul Harvest, which is admittedly hard to play because it costs 6, but it's essentially a blue Wrecker Romp, right? It's a 6 attack blue that blocks for 3, and we know that every brute deck shoves like 3 of those in every deck. So if you see them and you're already kind of set on Levia, I would just take more of them, honestly. As long as you don't have too many blues, you can just keep taking more. The strong Levia picks are basically any Shadow Brute cards with 6 power that block for 3. 3 block is very important because you need to be blocking effectively in the early game to fill your grave. I'd say that the yellow cards are probably top priority, such as the yellow Hungering Slaughter Beast and yellow Graveling Growl, because there are 6 powers that are yellows, and they basically do everything. They block for 3, they can be banished for Levia, and they can, more importantly, also be pitched for Meat Axe with a single card, so it's quite good. I'd also put the red Dread Screamer at the top of that list because it's one of the only ways that Levia can have access to Go Again, unlike Chane, who can get it whenever he wants, basically. Also, on the topic of Go Again, I'm not really a big fan of Captain's Call in Levia. I know Chane likes it, but you really can only play the red one because Levia's cards usually cost 2 or more, and it also blocks for 2 unless you're pairing it with the Rally the Rear Guard. So it does limit your blocking potential early game when you really want to be filling that grave. The red Endless Maw and the red Withering Beast Hulk are great for closing out games. The Withering Beast Hulk being able to gain Dominate, and of course the daddy card of the deck is basically going to be the Endless Maw for 9 damage, and it's really hard to block that out late game. But they are rare. Well, at least the Maw is rare, so it won't pop up as much. But, it's a snap pick for Levia for sure. I'd put the non-blocking brute cards towards the bottom of the priority list. So we're talking mainly about Smash with Big Tree and the, I think the Pulping is the other one. But Pulping is great for closing out games because it does have Go Again and Dominate. But you don't be caught off with a Pulping in your hand when you have to be blocking, especially early game. So I'd kind of stay away from those early on. Try to focus on some of the shadow ones if you can. Smash with Big Tree is another, it's good in the yellow because it is a yellow 6 attack. So I'd probably pick it over the red if you can. But if you do have them in your deck and you see them late game, it isn't ideal because you'd probably prefer to play a strong card that also banishes to turn off Blood Debt than using your only action point to swing for 6 or 7. And you can't block with it, so you're basically forced to play or to pitch it. That's typically why the yellow Smash with Big Tree is more favorable, because at least you can pitch it late game if you have to, but the red one is pretty much a dead card if you have to turn off Blood Debt or you have to block, basically. Blue Deadwood Rumbler is also an okay consideration because it's a 6 blue power, but I'm not a big fan of the yellow and red, so I'd probably stay away from those if you can pick other brute cards instead of those. Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell is actually a great pick because it allows you to utilize a 4 to 5 card hand pretty effectively, mainly due to lack of a Go Again, and can turn off Blood Debt on turns where you draw a Smash with Big Tree or a generic 6 attack card, because you can play it, banish some cards, turn off Blood Debt, then come in for 9 or 10 damage, which is nice. It is a rare though, so don't really count on seeing it that often, but late game it's a very potent and flexible card that can close out games.
Yeah, I will add Convulsions. I think so far, I think it's really after Hooves. I mean, Rob will talk about Hooves in a minute. After Hooves and
the Dread
oh my God,
Screamer.
What's the Go Again?
Dread
After
Screamer.
those 2 cards, Convulsions is the GOAT.
Yeah.
This card, the fact that it gives Dominate to anything is just Levia's problem with closing out games and just killing herself is the answer is Dominate. Writhing Beast Hulk,
Pulping.
But Convulsions gives it to everything. You just need to banish. It's not that hard.
Exactly.
Right? This card blocks for 3. Did you mention that? It blocks for 3?
I didn't, but basically everything I like in the deck blocks for 3, but it does everything.
It's a rare, but pick up the yellows, blues, and reds of Convulsion. Don't.
Yeah,
the red is obviously nice, but I think pick up all the Convulsions you see. Trust me, I have won
It'll close out
many a
games.
game.
Yeah.
I've won many a game off literally convulsions dominating anything to win a game.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's an amazing card. Plus, if you have to turn off Blood Debt and you don't really have the cards to do so, and you're like late game and it's like you have 6, 7 cards in Banish, you'll pretty much just die without it. So it's a really
Yep.
good card. I wholeheartedly think it is one of the best cards in the deck, but you have to be committed to Levia to be able to pick them up, first of all. But, usually
Scary,
by like
scary
end of
thought.
pick one, pack two, you're pretty much committed anyway. So just take them if you
Hopefully.
see them, I think, yeah. So this here's an interesting point. So she's interesting because in CC or Blitz, her Majestics actually don't do a whole lot for her. Most of them don't block. Her weapon Hexacore isn't great because early game it doesn't do nearly as much as the Meat Axe, and even late game I would say it's kind of mid because you don't really have much
No.
going in anyway. And Mark of the Beast, although it does block and is a yellow 6 power, it forces you into a blood debt train when you might not be ready for it. So, like, early on in the game, if you draw out a 4 card hand, you want to block. If you block with it, you're starting your blood debt. If you play it, you're starting your blood debt. So, it's actually very awkward in draft. It might have been okay in CC a little bit because you can kind of control. You control a little bit better, but when your deck isn't like fully tailored and constructed, it's kind of really awkward to use. Um, it is great late game though if you have an effective way to turn off your blood debt. So it's basically like a single card to turn off blood debt, which is nice. But in no way is it a priority pick for building Levia. So I would stay away from the Majestics in general, with the exception of Shadow Puppetry. You always take Shadow Puppetry if you see it. Eric did allude to this. This is the hooves of the Shadow Beast, so they are an absolute powerhouse in Levia. If you're playing her, always take it 100%. The one block Battle Worn is enough, on its own to pick it, but being able to gain an action point on a whim basically allows you to go for like 15 plus damage, late game, and you can really close out a game with it with like Maw and something like that. It also really plays to Levi's weaknesses, right? Of adding in that extra source of go again, or extra action point, if you will. But it's basically a necessity. Like if you don't have it, Levi gets a lot weaker. So if you're
A lot.
yeah,
A
100%,
lot weaker.
a lot in
I
caps
don't know.
bolded.
I have played games without it, games with it,
Yeah, you can tell
and
night
games
and day.
somewhere in between,
Yeah,
and it's just like
in between.
night and day. Like literally
Yeah,
the one piece of equipment in this entire set that makes the difference.
yeah,
Like there's other great Gallantry Gold, the Iron Weave,
yeah.
whatever. But then there's hooves, and this
Yeah.
card comes in for 7. Like let's be realistic. The card
It's
comes
usually
in
a
for
7 damage card. Yeah.
because it lets you play like Graveling Growl for
Yeah,
free.
Graveling
Essentially,
Growl just
right?
comes in. Yeah, exactly.
And what
Yeah.
other equipment's coming in for 7? 8
Not
because of
many.
Battle Worn. So you get the 1 armor and you get the 7. Like
It's
that's
true. The Battle
what
Worn
kind of
is
ratios are
good on
those?
its own, but yeah,
Leviathan needs this. Leviathan needs this
right.
equipment. If you do not see this equipment early, by early I mean within like the first 6 to 7
Mm,
ish picks,
might be not
possibly 8.
not time to go on Levia. Yeah,
Because then you're on a hope and a prayer, and if you're on the third Levia without hooves,
yeah.
you just
Honestly,
GG.
night and day for Levia. She needs it so much.
Yeah.
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 Talking to her playstyle a little bit. Early game, you're gonna likely be blocking aggressively and not looking to trade health as much, right? Avoid playing cards that banish from grave too early because that'll set you on the blood debt train, and once you're on, you can't get off. So make sure that the grave is healthily stocked before you set that off. The Meat Axe is your best friend early game, as well as the generic 6 attack cards and the non-shadow brute cards like Smash of the Big Tree and Pulping. They're great for dealing out damage and not turning on blood debt basically. Mid game, when you've got 6 or more cards in your graveyard, you can consider starting to trade life a little bit more and playing nice chains such as the Dread Screamer into Graveling Growl for like 12 damage. You can play like a single Endless Maw for 9, or your Boneyards and your Beast Hulks for a bit more pressure. I wouldn't play more than 1 attack that banishes that early, because you'll quickly deplete your graveyard, but mileage will vary based on any brute deck really. So if you draw the Dream Hand, play it out, but it's kind of hard to be able to play like 2 cards that banish on your like really small grave, and then you can't really keep going once you've depleted that resource. But yeah, be conscientious of that. Late game, obviously, it's a different story. So late games, when you start to aggressively start trading life, you should be turning off blood debt every turn. Basically, it's not worth blocking and then taking damage from Blood Debt, you might as well take the damage from the attack and then come back with something big. And sometimes, yeah, that means taking some face damage in order to turn off your own Blood Debt. Cards like Convulsions from the Bells of Hell, Hooves of the Shadow Beast, and Graveling Growl become priorities to play out in order to close those games. So make sure to keep that in mind. If you haven't used your Hooves yet, make sure to use it at some point in the late game, because it's going to definitely swing the tide in your favor. So just to summarize, building Levia. Stick to 6 attack cards, mostly. Generics being better early game to stay open, but eventually move on to the Shadow Brood cards because they're your bread and butter. 3 blocks are key, even if they're subpar cards, because they'll hopefully just be used early game to fuel the grave and to maintain your life lead. Stay away from Levia's Majestic pool, with the Shadow Puppetry being the polar exception. Always go for that. Look for go again cards, such as Dread Screamer, and of course the Hooves of the Shadow Beast for the action point. And finally, look for strong cards that can help you close out a game, mainly the red Endless Maws, red and yellow Graveling Growls, or cards that can give Dominate, like Convulsions, as Eric so highly spoke of, the Writhing Beast Halt, and to some extent the red Pulping as well is also very good. So that's Levia, basically.
Yeah, I think the Shadow Heroes are definitely very, very different than the Light Heroes, especially learning curve wise. I think they do take more effort to learn how to play them properly because, as Rob says, once the train starts going, you gotta stay on it here. And Chane is very similar. Yeah. If you're shackling and you're prepping for these big, 3 shackle, 4 shackle turns, you got to know what you're doing here. Otherwise, it's very easy to miss pips of damage. It's very easy to take extra damage when you don't need to. And it's very hard to play as effectively compared to the Light Heroes, where you're just, as we'll allude to in the next video,
we'll get to
the times you're just blocking and throwing a 7 at them and passing, for the most part. And then you've got some bigger turns here or there, but it's much easier for you to do less and come out with more. So the ceiling might be lower on them, but on the Light Heroes, but they get efficiency.
They're more consistent
and consistency. And the Shadow Heroes are just like coming in from the bellows of hell. So with that being said, hopefully everyone kind of got something out of the Shadow side. And with that, if you like that kind of content, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. We will be doing the light portion with all the darkness there is of obviously light, and that will be coming out pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. And from wherever you're watching in the world, have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Bye for now.